Hello again. In this stream I created a image based loosely on this previous image that I had made that same day, which was the Jeep Willys, which is a very iconic design, very associated with the army and mostly with the Vietnam War. So I decided to create something within the same sort of realm. So here I'm basically creating the base image, which is 300 by 200 pixels, I think. I eventually change as I feel like the composition needs to change. And I want to make another iconic shape associated as well with the Vietnam War, which is the Hueys, the Bell HU choppers that used to carry troops in and out. And there's very strong imagery of war films where the helicopters are sort of flying towards the sunset or flying away from a sunset. And in this case, I wanted them to fly away from the sunset for the simple reason that I wanted to have the sunset and the front of the choppers in the same image. Mostly because the front of the chopper would be a more interesting shape to draw and to shade, really. So here I'm showing some of the reference that I'm looking at. And I'm not really using the correct perspective on the reference, but I want to get sort of like the silhouette of the chopper, and I want to get the main shapes correct, so that when people look at it, they kind of feel that they know what they're looking at, and they have this sort of reminiscing image of something they have seen before, maybe in movies. And that's kind of the way I want to establish a relationship with the viewer. So there's a lot of exercise of imagination and looking at the shape and kind of figuring out, is that the correct silhouette of this three-dimensional shape? Because the sunlight is so strong that it will increase the contrast on the airplane so much that you won't be able to see it. Of course, you can always see highlights from the sky. In this case, I'm using the sky color as a way to create a highlight on the front of the chopper. And the issue here is that I'm looking at reference of the Huey in a sunset. So there's very little information there because they're silhouetted in front of the background. So they're basically black shapes. And I can't really make out any of the details except for silhouette-based details. So, you know, the overall shape. So eventually I go for photos of the chopper in daylight so that I can actually read the details, because that will better inform me of how to actually shade some of the surfaces, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to figure out what they would look like. So I'm trying to keep the mechanical details, you know, fairly believable. The propeller at the back doesn't really work that well. And here I'm shading the side because I want to get some of that sunlight to reflect off of the chopper in a kind of Fresnel reflection way. So I can carve shapes on the side of the chopper just by simulating reflections. So for example, I have that yellow reflection there, but I can kind of cut it away for it to make sort of like to make a doorway to come in. So here I think I've already found the reference for like the proper front of the chopper, and I've changed the shape of the front there, and I'm also going to include some details like the center beam of the windscreen, some reflection there. And you can see there I've basically carved a door on the side of the chopper by leaving that black area unshaded, because that means that there's a surface that is lacking, that doesn't exist there. And that way I can simulate an entrance. I'm also trying to get some of the roundness of the back just by having the sunlight reflect more at the top. And for the propeller here at the back, I decided to just go with a shape, really, rather than trying to mimic the blurriness. I'll just go with like what the rotation would look like, which is kind of weird because in the big propeller we only see like the bigger propeller. But, you know, you kind of feel like maybe this is like a slow motion shot from the movie where you can clearly see the different propellers. Here I'm also trying to fix the perspective on the landing gear? I'm not sure what's called, but, you know, feet, whatever. Because they have to match the rotation of the chopper. Here I played around with blurring and having that blurred layer on top as an overlay to show the effect of the light of the sun sort of leaking into the silhouette of the chopper. Here I'm adding an extra shade for details, but as well for carving some of the shapes onto the first part of in the front of the chopper. So here's what I do. I create a copy of that chopper, and I scale it down using nearest neighbor as my filtering so that it doesn't blur anything off, but it does crunch the pixels into a mess. But that's fine because this is supposed to be something that I just want basic silhouette of. And then what I do is I take every shape and I brighten it up one step with whatever I have in my palette. This way, if the color is black, it now is a dark yellow. And if the color is dark yellow, it now is bright yellow. And if it's bright yellow, then it's just blown off. So you can see that I only have one shade of sky reflection in the front of the chopper. And I actually play around with getting rid of it or changing into yellow, but I kind of leave it because I think it looks best. Now, so far, the relationship and the contrast between the two choppers is, you know, it kind of works, but it kind of doesn't. And it's because of lack of context. I feel like the chopper is too yellow for such a bright orange sky. And that's eventually going to change. I'm going to find a much more interesting reference for the sunset, because I will get something which will show a much darker sky, which actually falls into the much darker chopper. So here's me playing around with the reference that I have. So I found a reference where the sun is way brighter at the top, a lot less bright at the bottom, and the sky is also dark, but I get that sort of saturated red rim light around the sun, which is sort of, it's radiating off, and that allows for interesting shapes to be carved both into the sun, but as well it allows for me to change the hues and the colors on the second chopper, which right now is very yellow. But we have to understand that the propellers on the second chopper can't be, here's the reference actually, you can see I think this is me explaining I think this is me explaining how we can actually test that the Earth is not flat. But it's mostly we're dealing with having the sun and the sunset, and why the shadows will look longer if it's like late sunset time. So basically the color of the sky is darker than the color of the second chopper, which, you know, it may happen in some sort of phenomenon, but not really in this case, because the sky is not darker than the propellers. So here I play around with the contrast, and eventually I change the color of the second chopper so it's more saturated. It's more, you know, taking in a lot more of that sky color rather than just being a different hue that doesn't really belong in the scene. You know, if the sun is really tinting the atmosphere with this bright, intense red or this crimson color, then the things that are, you know, suffering from atmospheric density that are further away from the camera, they should be tinted with that color. Here I'm also adding palm trees for scale. The way I had it before, it felt like this front shape was actually in front of the choppers, because in my reference the ground is black. But I can't have the ground be black, because then that ground will be pushed as close to the camera as the chopper, because it is the same values, right? And so there's the issue of whether or not I should keep that as a black shape or just change its color to this red so that I push it away closer to the sun. You can also see that I changed the color of the second chopper to a darker red, and I'm adding a few more details here. Now, one of the things that you see at the top there is the carved in shape at the sun. So I kind of figured that that would be a way for me to do the clouds, because there's also something that is usually present. What you see at the bottom is the kind of reflection of the heat on the ground, because it's so hot that when light travels through that area, because it's thinner, light kind of bends and it simulates a reflection on the ground. It's pretty much the idea behind a mirage. When you see a mirage in the desert, which I've never, but you can see that on a hot day on your on the road, on asphalt. You can kind of see puddles of water that aren't really there. And here what I'm doing is I'm just getting some really long clouds to come in on the sun and sort of carving away at the shape. And I'm using my trusty varying pixel-sized brush to create those shapes. And they're basically helping out the idea of having a more interesting background. I think right now at this point, I think I have too many highlights on the clouds, and I think I take them down a bit because they're a little excessive. And I also fix the landing gears on the chopper. I also make the landing gear details slightly brighter so that it looks like they're thinner, because they're getting sort of eaten away by the color of the sun a bit more. So this is pretty much what the image ended up looking like. I think I'm doing minor adjustments here in contrast just to frame the whole thing together. But overall, for what was about an hour stream, I think. And here I'm adding an even more cinematic effect just by having those black bars above and below. So I recrop it and then add those bars. So this is it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned something. So take care.